In this video, we're doing an overview of how philosophers approach the topic of religion. And so this is a broad and general introduction to the philosophy of religion. And one thing to clarify, we're focusing narrowly here on the Western religious traditions, the monotheistic traditions of Islam, Judaism, Christianity. And among those traditions, they have shared concepts of God in this sense. So God is omniscient, he is all-knowing, omnipotent, that is, he is all-powerful. By the way, I'm using the masculine pronoun, as is the tradition among those religions that affirm a monotheistic God. God is omnibenevolent, that is, he is perfectly good. He is personal, he is an individual with thoughts and intentions and able to engage in relationships with other people. He is immaterial, that is non-physical, not matter. He is eternal, which can be defined in a few different ways, but for here, we'll just move on. And he is necessary in the sense of cannot fail to exist. Now, these characteristics are explained and discussed much more thoroughly in my videos on my website on who is God. But for now, we have a general idea of the topic of philosophy of religion that we're going to focus on. So I neglected the characteristic of God being independent, that is distinct from everything else. So God is not part of the universe, or is not the universe himself, that is. He is completely distinct from the created universe. Okay, the relevance of the topic. Why should we be concerned about God as we just described him? Well, there's a quote from Niels Rehut, and I'm just going to read it instead of putting it on the screen. I think it's very interesting, and I'm going to comment along as I read it. You have the location of the quote there. Some philosophical problems seem far removed from the way we live our day-to-day lives. However, this is not true when we deal with questions about God. And here, Rehut is expressing a common view, definitely shared by many other people who engage in philosophy of religion, that this is a very practical concern the philosophers have here. If God exists, I'm quoting, we must understand ourselves and the universe in terms of a relationship with a perfect and necessary being. Part of our lives should then be devoted to building this relationship through prayer, observance of religious rituals, or the reading of holy books like the Bible or the Quran. If, on the other hand, God does not exist, we are faced with a different situation. While we would be free to dismiss most religious activities as nonsense, we would have to accept the idea that we are finite beings who live in a universe without ultimate meaning or purpose. Again, these views are shared by many, many philosophers, and it seems to be the case that this is an issue in philosophy that is extremely important for how one lives their lives. There are various potential approaches to religious beliefs. I believe these came from Michael Peterson, William Hasker, Bruce Reichenbach, and David Basinger's book on reason and religious belief, but I haven't been able to find that source. Possibly I got it from Louis Poyman. In any case, I didn't get it from myself. I did get it from one of those 5 people I just mentioned, but I'm tweaking the terms, and I'm, of course, using illustrations and such that are my own. The 3 different views that there are to approach religious beliefs are strong rationalism, so we'll talk about that, the idea that you have to have a reason for your belief, and it has to be a very strong reason. Fideism, which is a word taking the Latin word for faith, fide, and making it into an ism like we like to do. So this would be faithism, and critical rationalism. So let's take these one by one. Let's consider strong rationalism. The thesis here is that In order for a religious system to be rational, a religious belief system to be rational, one must be able to prove that the religious belief system is true. You have to be able to prove it. So whatever you believe when it comes to religion, you have to be able to prove it. You have to be able to argue that would convince any other person that you are correct. Now, there are certain challenges and difficulties with taking this approach. Now, some people have taken this approach, both atheists and theists. Atheists often take this approach. Theists have taken this approach. Thomas Aquinas, I believe, may have considered himself a strong rationalist. But there are difficulties with taking this approach. There has been no developing consensus of thoughtful and reflective people on what can or cannot be shown in relation to religious belief. So there really isn't any arguments. There aren't any arguments that are convincing to everyone, that everyone reads them or sees them or hears them and says, wow, yes, that's the truth. Of course, that's the way it goes in philosophy, but the strong rationalist seems to be demanding too much. And in this sense, probably Aquinas wouldn't be the strong rationalist, maybe a modified version. The other problem with strong rationalism, and again, this is true for other issues in philosophy, that is, everyone has prior convictions that affect their rational assessment of the issue. In this case, their rational assessment of belief in God. We approach philosophy with preconceived notions, with beliefs that we already have in our life, and we don't just toss those aside when we engage in philosophy. And this is true for all philosophers, and it's true for no matter the topic that we're doing. And so it would be crazy to expect that you could find an argument that's going to be able to convince anyone among people who have such a wide variety of prior convictions. So strong rationalism is generally rejected. The second view we considered is Fideism, and this thesis is that beliefs about God are not subject to rational evaluation. Often lay people who are religious believers seem to affirm something like this. No, it's just my personal belief in religion. Don't try to argue with me about it. Arguments are not relevant here. Beliefs about God are not subject to rational evaluation. An example of a philosopher, actually kind of hard to find, maybe Kierkegaard. He talked about taking a leap of faith and how that's required. As an existentialist, he thought that was extremely important to take this just step of faith. Now, there are others who might take the approach that all religious belief is entirely subjective, so there is no truth of the matter, which I think is fairly ludicrous, actually, because if there is a God that exists that created the universe, that being doesn't exist for some people and not for other people. So there's a truth of the matter whether this being we're talking about exists or not, and it's going to be true no matter what you think or believe. So that second option, even though lay people again often propose it, it's not very plausible. Okay, difficulties. I've already hinted at some, but going to the issue of leap of faith, right? If beliefs of God are not subject to rational evaluation, you just have to take a leap of faith. Well, how do you evaluate where to take a leap? I mean, do you take a leap into Islam? And if so, which type of Islam? The same with Christianity, or do you become a Mormon or a Jehovah's Witness or a Jew? What do you do, right? How do you evaluate where to take a leap? And it seems like you have to use reason to do that. And again, I didn't mention other cults and so on that why not jump into the Branch Davidians or something like that? Okay, another difficulty is that religions make claims that are either true or false. And so when you're making claims that are either true or false, those ought to be subject to rational evaluation. So Christians believe that God created the universe. That's either true or it's false. And as such, it seems like it ought to be subject to rational evaluation. Okay, so not many philosophers take the approach of fideism. How about critical rationalism? Critical rationalism says that beliefs about God can and should be rationally criticized and evaluated. Although conclusive proof is impossible. It's not possible to find that argument that's going to convince any rational person. Instead, you can, though, do some rational evaluation of religious beliefs. And this is the position that is assumed to be the case, the best approach by most philosophers who engage in philosophy of religion. Whether it's explicit or not, it's also the position taken by most apologists, that is, people who are trying to defend their faith. They are engaging in rational discussion about religious belief, so they would seem to be engaging in critical rationalism. Now, the methods of critical rationalism will describe three different things that a critical rationalist does here. And this is the approach actually most of us used ourselves at some point in our life. Now, not necessarily a religious belief, and I hope I don't step on any toes here when I address this topic, and I apologize if I'm being treading on ground. Maybe I should give a trigger warning here, but I'm going to talk about Santa Claus. And so critical rationalism uses the technique of assessing for internal coherence. So those characteristics of God that were described early in the video, some people might ask, well, do they all fit together? Is it reasonable to think that one being can have all those characteristics? So we examine for logical consistency amongst the religious beliefs. So with Santa Claus, we might ask a question like, is Santa Claus human or not? How old is Santa Claus? How does he know so much? Does he use spyware and technology that he knows when you're sleeping and when you're awake? So how does he know that? So we have to do some, well, clausology, right? What's the real Santa Claus like? What should we believe about Santa Claus? And does it all make sense? Is it the claymation version that we should address here? And what beliefs are true there? Is it the Tim Allen version, or any number of other versions of Santa Claus? We need to see what the beliefs are and then check to see if they are logically consistent. So that's what we also do when we're assessing a religious belief system. The second method of critical rationalism is to assess for external coherence. So we examine the beliefs to see if the system is consistent with known or generally accepted facts about the world and the universe. And so with Santa Claus, we might think through things like, well, how many children are there in the world? How many houses does Santa have to go through to? In a small town like Macomb, Illinois, Santa Claus would have to visit maybe 3,000, 4,000 houses. Well, he's only got, let's say 12 hours, maybe a little more. So that means he has less than a minute to get to 5 houses, right? He has to do more than 5 houses in a minute. Sorry, I'm going through the math here, just thinking it through. Well, does that make sense, right? Can he eat the cookies and drink the milk in 5 different houses in less than a minute? What about reindeer? What about the aerodynamics of reindeer? How do they fly? What about expeditions to the North Pole that don't show any evidence of a workshop, right? So we look at the way the world is, and we see if the belief system fits with what we know about the universe. So we assess that. A third method of critical rationalism is to assess for explanatory power. Do the views explain things coherently? Is there a coherent explanation of our experiences and what we know and such as that? Or maybe, are there better explanations, right? So you're 7 or 8 and your mom lets you use your phone and you're at a mall and you see Santa Claus at the mall and you call your friend and you say, hey, you got to get over here. Santa's at the mall. And your friend answers the phone and says, well, wait a minute. You got to get over here. No, Santa's over here. I'm at South Park Mall and you're at Northwoods Mall. And you're both saying there's Santa Claus, right? Is there a better explanation? Or you just are talking with a friend and you say on Christmas Eve, well, I'm going to have chocolate chip cookies tonight because mom says Santa Claus' favorite cookies are chocolate chip cookies. And your friend says, well, my mom says that Santa's favorite cookies are peanut butter cookies. And then you begin talking with your friend a little bit more, and then you find out that, well, your dad's favorite cookies are chocolate chip, and your friend's dad's favorite cookies are peanut butter cookies. Maybe there's a better explanation of what's going on here with the gifts that show up on Christmas morning, right? So we do the same thing when it comes to religious beliefs. Does the belief system cohere with what we know? Is it internally coherent? And does it explain our experiences? Does it explain things coherently? That's critical rationalism, the most common approach to philosophy of religion.